Multicultural Mosaic Foundation and the Abrahamic Initiative, thanks for making this dinner and dialogue be part of your evening and your day. My name is Suzanne Williams. I'm a past state senator for the state of Colorado, serving 8 years in the House, 8 years in the Senate. Term limited. And so now I'm a consultant and a volunteer in various organizations. In 2012, my husband Ed and I had the opportunity to go to Turkey, a study tour led by the Mosaic Foundation. And that's how we became involved with the Mosaic Foundation. Peace through dialogue is the core value that we could connect with. And this friendship dinner in this beautiful sanctuary is quite a treat. This is the third year, but we have never met in here before. But you might know that the other part of the building is under construction. And so we had the fortunate, possibility of being in this beautiful sanctuary. You can just imagine the music and what it's like in special events. At this time, I would like to recognize some special guests that we have here tonight. And if you would stand, special guests, when I call your name, and then we'll save the applause to the end. First, Representative Dan Papone, is he here? I don't think he's here. I don't think he's here yet. Let's see. Iman Ali, are you here? Iman Ali, please stand if you can. Thank you for being here. Dr. Ali, Dr. Sadiqa Salih. Thank you. Is Bob Troyer here yet? The Reverend Richard Lawson, or Dean. Thank you. Hal Simmons. I don't believe Senator John Kafalis is here yet, but is Brad Benavides? Is he here? FBI in Denver. Thank you. Melanie Perlman, I know, is here. Thank you, Melanie. Jeremy Schaefer from the ADL. Okay. And Senator Nancy Todd is here. Thank you, Nancy. Deacon Jeff Bennett, are you here? There you are, thank you. And Chief Nick Metz, I believe is here from the Aurora Police Department. Ahmad Salih, are you here? Maybe back up here. Ahmad. Thank you for all of you for coming, our special guests today. At this time, we are going to start our dinner, which is a buffet. So if the tables on the in this part of the cathedral would start, please, with the buffet, and the rest of you will have an opportunity to visit with your table, get to know your table, and then as you see this part of the cathedral is being served, then you can take your the food is up this way. Oh, it's over here. I'm sorry. Well, that would be, I didn't know where it was. The food is over here to the right through the doors that you came in. So would the people here to my right, to my left, come and start being served, please, at the buffet. Thank you. So enjoy your dinner, and we'll continue with the program after dinner. We hope you are enjoying your dinner and the company of your table. However, we do know that the people in the chancel, the tables in the chancel, have difficulty hearing, so they are going to be making their way to the pews, if you notice that that's happening. And you, as you finish your dinner, you might want to do the same thing, particularly if you have your back toward the speaker. Those of you who are here for this third annual, you might know and be sharing with your friends that you had the unique opportunity of eating in St. John's Cathedral. And those of you who ate in the chancel have even extra stars on your shoulders. This is a very unique experience, and thank you, those who ate in the chancel, for making your way down toward the pews. At this time, I would like to welcome to the podium here the Dean Richard Lawson of St. John's. He has a few words for you. Now, Richard is married to Catherine Lawson, and they have two children, Adeline and Evans, who attend East High School in Denver. Richard was called to be the Dean of St. John's Cathedral from Grace St. Luke's Church in Memphis, Tennessee, where he had served for 7 years as rector. Richard already loves the people of St. John's and the Colorado weather.
Thank you. It is really an honor to be with all of you on this night. And above all, it's an honor to welcome all of you to St. John's, which is a sacred place, but on this occasion, it's a sacred place not because it's a place of worship, but because all of you are here. I'm reminded, knowing that this is the annual friendship dinner, of three of my favorite theologians who work together and have worked together for decades, primarily in England, in interfaith dialogue. One of whom is an imam, one of whom is a Jewish rabbi, and one of whom is, of course, a Christian minister. And what these three scholars say that they believe is needed most in the world today and needs to be recovered from our sacred texts, the Quran and the Hebrew Scriptures, and of course the New Testament. What needs to be recovered the most are these two virtues: friendship and the search for wisdom. The need for friendship is obvious. It's a great joy to eat and to be together in places like this. Community is one of the great gifts from God. And the search for wisdom is just as essential and pressing and obvious in the world. All wisdom is just simply knowing what to do, what to say or what not to say, what practical steps we can do to make the world more peaceful. So on this night, I'm honored to be in your midst, and I pray that the God whose name transcends all names will continue to grant us those two gifts, and not only to ourselves, but to the entire world. Again, welcome.
Thank you for the welcome and for this beautiful, beautiful location where we can have our dinner and dialogue together. As you know, tonight's event is sponsored by the Mosaic Foundation and the Institute, the Mosaic Foundation is here tonight, and to speak on behalf of the Mosaic Foundation, if Gulsum would come forward. I want to tell you a little bit about Gulsum Cantmer. Gulsum Cantmer was born and raised in the neighborhoods around Cappadocia, Turkey. And in 2007, she moved to the United States to pursue her education. She received her bachelor's degree in biology from UCLA in 2012, and her master's in economy from Penn State. Gulsum is a passionate teacher of Turkish language and art, and even cooking classes. She gives many talks around the community, the metro area, about Islam and particularly women in Islam. Gulsum Cantmer has been the executive director of the Multicultural Foundation since 2016. She and her husband, Ahmed, have 2 children, and they have lived in Colorado since 2013. And so at this time, please welcome Gulsum.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2018 Annual Dialogue and Friendship Dinner, brought to you by Multicultural Mosaic Foundation and the Abrahamic Initiative. The theme of this year's dinner is an American story of how to be a Muslim. And we are blessed tonight with a keynote speaker who's a well-known Muslim American. Today, as a society, we are sadly wandering away from the goal of establishing and cultivating pluralistic society that is tolerant of diversity. And unfortunately, this wander creates division, creates fear, creates hatred, and creates animosity among people of diverse backgrounds more than ever. United States, from the beginning, was a country of immigrants, and now almost 1/3 of population of this great nation is still immigrants from all over the world. People still immigrate for the similar reasons as the founders of United States of America. America's history of building a strong and resilient democracy is proof that welcoming immigrants from different cultures and traditions and maintaining security and the rule of law are not mutually exclusive. To the contrary, what makes our nation strong is its ability, indeed its commitment to embrace people of all races, ethnicities, and religions. All great religions of the world share a common perspective on respecting human dignity, on what is right and wrong, and what is fair and just. Values determine how we and future generations live, so we all have a key role to play. It is important to realize, speak up for shared values and common objectives, and we all should highlight and promote examples of intercultural and interfaith harmony. As Multicultural Mosaic Foundation, our mission is promote acceptance and the celebration of others through interfaith and intercultural understanding. We stand ready to facilitate and join all efforts to reconcile social and political tensions through respectful dialogue and peace building. It is our sincere hope that this annual dialogue and friendship dinner contributes to this effort of strengthening and widening of the middle ground, so much so that everyone can get a sense of belonging and the sense of being home. Welcome again and enjoy the rest of the evening. Peace be with all of you.
Thank you, Gulsum. And our other sponsor for tonight from the Abrahamic Institute is Greg Movasian. If you would come forward, please, Greg. You can climb out of here. Now, Greg Movasian has been involved with the Abrahamic Initiative for 16 years. And he is the co-founder of the organization and has served as the chair of the steering committee and continues to help create programming and guidance for the organization. Greg has been a member of a number of interfaith and ecumenical boards and committees around the metro area, including the Religious Advisory Council to the University of Denver and the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. He is a former president of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. Please welcome Greg.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. It's good to see so many people here for this wonderful friendship dinner. It's just a very special evening, I think, every year to be able to do this, to celebrate the wonderful work of the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation. It's an honor for the Abrahamic Initiative to be partnering with the foundation on this and so many other occasions to foster peace and understanding. And it's an honor to have all of you here who, through your various capacities and walks of life and ministries and service in the community, bring people together rather than allowing divisions to persist. Our work is never ending, but it is important work, and it is work that bears fruit. And I want to say about the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation, and especially in the light of the terrible experiences they are having in their home country, or one of their home countries of Turkey, that, you know, there's a verse in the gospel according to Matthew, by your fruits you shall know them. And I believe that to be true. No matter what adversaries may say about this wonderful foundation and these wonderful people who we count as friends, who we have come to know and love over the years, no matter what's said about them by those adversaries, we know them to be true. We know them to be loving and good. And I'm reminded of St. Paul's letter to the Galatians in chapter 5, where he talks about the fruit of the Spirit. And he describes the fruit of the Spirit, giving a number of attributes, 9 attributes actually. And they would be love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. And I have to say, and wouldn't you agree, that those of us who know our dear friends from the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation, doesn't this describe them? And that's why I say that we know them to be true, and we know them to be working with integrity to foster peace and understanding in this community and in so many other communities in this nation and around the world. And this is work that we are all privileged to share in. I'm so delighted that Haroon Moghul will be joining us. Someone else will be introducing him, but I have to say that the Abrahamic Initiative invited Haroon to speak at the University of Denver several years ago. And again, such a wonderful and delightful and gracious man to open up an understanding of the Sharia in that particular instance that helped people not be afraid of it. As a matter of fact, as I recall, the name of the talk was "Who's Afraid of Sharia Law?" And we know who's afraid of Sharia law. It's people who know nothing about Sharia law, and so many of us. And at the time of that speech and presentation, you know, there was talk of laws being passed in various states banning Sharia law. I mean, really, heavens. But those of us from our various faith traditions who understand the impulse to know what God would have us do and be, we appreciate all these revelations and this understanding, and we stand together not in fear, but in love, to appreciate and embrace the richness of the diversity that God shares through all of us, each in our own capacity. And so I welcome you all tonight on behalf of the Abrahamic Initiative in that spirit. May we all bear the fruit of the Spirit and all those wonderful attributes. And may God bless the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation. May He pour out the richness of His grace, His compassion, His mercy, and may He just bless this group with peace and with His divine favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. And now we are ready to meet our speaker, our featured speaker for the evening. And if you would come forward, please, Haroon Moghul, and I will tell folks about you. Haroon is a fellow in the Jewish-Muslim relations at the Shalom Hartman Institute and an adjunct professor at Columbia University School of Journalism. He is published in New York Times, Time Magazine, CNN, and more. And in 2016, he was honored with the Religion News Writers Award for Religion and Reporting Excellence. Haroon is the author of 3 books, including How to Be a Muslim, An American Story, which the Washington Post called an extraordinary gift, and an authentic portrayal of a vastly misunderstood community. So way back when, he was a fellow at Fordham Law School's Center on National Security and with the National Security Studies Program at New America Foundation. At this time, I would like you to help me welcome, at this time, our speaker, Haroon Moghul.
Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to Colorado. Probably live here. Still, it's a nice place to live. That was, I never ever in my life imagined I would be standing here. We mentioned the benefit of immigrants in any society. So my parents were immigrants, and so the thought occurred to me that if only my father could see me standing here right now, he would say, "You're still a failure." Because the great thing about being the child of immigrants is you are constantly reminded of your inadequacy. So just to give you a sense of how this, if anyone here is South Asian, you'll understand this pain, since this giant gaping hole inside me that will never be filled. I deal with it with a therapist, so don't worry about that. My father was born in the 1930s in what was then British India, and he lived through the riots and the violence that basically accompanied the partition of British India into India and Pakistan. And he was very poor. He doesn't know what day he was born because his mother was illiterate and his father was off fighting the Nazis. He was in the British Army, like many South Asians were. And so he doesn't know when he was born. He has a rough estimate. He thinks it was in April. So, we don't celebrate lots of days as his birthday because my father's the kind of person you can't get a gift for because he'll just ask you how much it cost and then he'll make you return it. And the ticket to getting out of those circumstances was the military. So he signed up for the Army. He fought in the '65 war. He studied. He became a doctor. He came to the United States in the early 1970s. I was born at some point thereafter. I won't tell you when. If you guess, you'll win a prize. And when he discovered that I wanted to be a writer, I think more than anything he was confused as to the fact that you could earn a living by writing things. It seemed very strange to him. So one day when he was watching the news, he turned to me and he said, "Aren't you writing a book?" And I said, "Yes." And then he asked the question that every writer dreads: when will it be finished? And I immediately became very defensive and began to point out that writing is an art and you cannot rush creativity and these things happen on a timeline. And he turns to look at me and says, "Bill Clinton's book got published in 6 months." At which point I gently pointed out that Bill Clinton was at one point the most powerful human being on the planet. He could probably write anything and get it published. Do you know what my father said to me? "Why can't you be president?" That's what it's like to grow up as the child of immigrants. God bless him. Okay, so what am I talking about? I don't even know. Do you know? Okay, well, first of all, I should thank everyone for coming out. I appreciate your coming to such a beautiful place. I'm actually of a mind to sit and simply absorb how utterly spectacular and moving this place is. I want to give a shout out to Table 2. All the tables are awesome, but Table 2 is the most awesome. And I'm going to tell a very personal story. I made the mistake of writing my speech on my phone. And this is not the worst instance. Once I was very proud of myself, I wrote it on a subway train. I was speaking at Shabbat services at Brotherhood Synagogue in Gramercy Park in Manhattan. Can anyone tell why that's a problem? Exactly. I realized as I got off the train that it would be rather inappropriate to pull out my cell phone now that it was Shabbat. So I proceeded to tell stories about my Starbucks names for about 20 minutes, and then we did a book signing. They have not invited me back. I've learned not to write my speech out on planes because it alarms my fellow Americans. I actually, I worked in national security for a while, so I interviewed with an intelligence agency, and they brought me down to one of their facilities near DC to take an Arabic language proficiency test to basically demonstrate that I had the ability to translate Arabic in real time. And so they helpfully sent me a list of vocabulary to help me prepare for the exam. And this is the vocabulary you don't learn in Arabic 101, such as, for example, rocket-propelled grenade or improvised explosive device. I thought it would be a great idea, because this is why they wanted to hire me, because I was so smart. I thought it'd be a great idea to study on the flight down. So I pulled out my list of vocab and just started studying. I am pretty sure the guy next to me stopped breathing and didn't breathe for the rest of the flight. And that man got off the plane faster than I thought humanly possible. And I'm pretty sure he called everyone he loved, reconnected with all his old friends, and found religion thanks to me. So I'm a good person. I can't tell you what happened to the exam. So I'm here to tell a personal story about what it's like to be an American Muslim. And what I'm going to tell you is a very confessional story, so it's a story that's meaningful to me and the faith tradition I come from. I don't mean for this story to be in any way alienating. It's simply my own story and something that I found personally moving, and how this speaks to who I am and where we are in this moment as communities and as a country. I was in New York City on September 11th, 2001. I was president of the Muslim students group at New York University, which meant as a 21-year-old, I was president of the largest substantial Muslim community in proximity to Ground Zero. Again, I was also 21 years old. So I was a deeply socially anxious kid. I never really anticipated myself in any kind of public role. And yet, the events of that day and the weeks and months after made me feel very strongly that I had an obligation to do something to help our country in the decisions that lay ahead of us. And so I began to write. I worked in national security for a while. I taught courses on Islam in the Middle East in the belief that the work I was doing would have some kind of positive benefit. And one of the results of that is, as I'm teaching, as was mentioned before, at the journalism school at Columbia University. And I'm teaching a course called Covering Religion, where we take 16 students to Israel and Palestine to basically experience the heart of some of the world's great faith traditions. And so it was an incredibly moving experience for me, myself, just to watch my students experience this place for themselves. So for example, we were in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, and one of my students, who actually identifies as an atheist, kind of broke down. And it was really, really affecting to watch, because she turned and said, I'd read stories about Bethlehem all the time, but you may as well have been talking about Santa Claus in the North Pole. It never felt real to me, and now I'm actually in the place where Jesus was born, and I don't know what to do with that. And so it felt like a really good thing to be able to take these students on this kind of journey, and for them it was I think for all of them, it was very personally meaningful and very eye-opening. It was also meaningful for me because I wanted to take them to one building in specific that speaks to me, one place that speaks to me as a Muslim very strongly, and that's the Dome of the Rock. You may have seen, if you've actually ever seen a news broadcast about Jerusalem, you've seen this building. It's an octagonal building, it's white in the bottom half and then blue, and it has a gold dome. It is Dome of the Rock, and there's a rock underneath the dome. This actually sometimes surprises people when they go to the building, even though it should be obvious. Muslims, we like to name things in very obvious ways because we have a tendency to get lost. There's two things we can't do: follow directions and form lines. This is actually true. We have no idea how to form lines. We just kind of just rush at everything. And very excitedly too. Actually, the only time Muslims can form lines is prayer. I don't understand where that comes from. But other than that, this is true, right? We don't know how to form lines. And if you see a Muslim in the Muslim world who is standing in line, it's probably an undercover operative from a Western government. Because you can't take that out of an American, right? They're like, oh, well, I should stand in line, right? So or it's like the person who buckles their seatbelt, that's an FBI agent. They're respect, dude. Other than giving you valuable tips that might save your life, we went to the Dome of the Rock, and I wanted to tell the students why it meant a lot to me. Now, Jerusalem as a city is sacred to Muslims as well. It's sacred to many people for many different reasons. But for us, it's sacred for several reasons, and I'll tell you those, and then speak to why the Dome of the Rock in particular had such an imprint on me from the first time I visited that place when I was 21 years old. So Jerusalem is sacred in the Muslim tradition because we believe that when Adam and Eve were pushed out of paradise, the first place they went is what is now Mecca, and Adam built a temple or a mosque or a house to worship God there, and 40 years later arrived at the Temple Mount, which is the kind of the highest point in the old city of Jerusalem, and built the second house of God on earth. And so we believe that Jerusalem is connected to the very beginnings of humanity and human religion. It's also sacred because it is the city of prophets who are kings, like David and Solomon. It's also sacred because it's a city connected to Zechariah, to Mary, to Jesus, to John the Baptist, peace be upon them. And actually, on the Temple Mount, what the Muslims call the Haram, the sanctuary, is the site where we believe the Annunciation happened. So everyone has their own location for where the Annunciation happened, and we get to get in on the fun. So we believe that in a corner of what is now the Haram, the sanctuary, the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary and announced the birth of a son who is the Word and Spirit of God and the Messiah, Jesus. And so incidentally, whenever I mention this, there's always a few people in the audience who get really confused that I'm talking about Jesus and I'm Muslim. But yes, we also believe he is the Messiah. My personal theory is Jesus has to come back to explain who he actually is, because there's a lot of confusion. Nobody really knows for sure, right? So he's just gonna have to come back and be like, guys, listen. That's gonna be awkward. Imagine if Jesus came back during the current administration. That would be interesting. I'm just saying, right? Because when the aliens land, they always go visit the American president, right? Because you would go to the most powerful person. That would be one heck of a conversation. I would pay a lot of money that I don't have because I'm a writer to be a fly on that wall. Anyway, am I allowed to make political comments literally in a church? Probably not. Yeah, but it's okay. They'd be like, the Muslim did it. So, Jerusalem is sacred for those reasons. But I think the reason it's particularly sacred to me is the Dome of the Rock is a building that was constructed to reflect a moment in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. And it's a moment that spoke very powerfully to me because it spoke to something I never got from Islam. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of a history and some names that might be unfamiliar, but the overall arc of the story shouldn't be too hard to understand. His mother died when he was 6, and then he was passed on to his grandfather, his paternal grandfather, who died when he was 8. So at the age of 8, he had basically lost all of his close family members, and he lived in a tribal society where if you didn't have relatives, you basically had nothing going for you. If you didn't belong to a tribe, there was no one to look out for you. And so an uncle took him in, named Abu Talib. And he raised him, and he taught him to be a businessman, to be a trader, because that's basically what everyone in Mecca did. The business of Mecca was business. And he did reasonably well. And when he was in his early 20s, he began working for a wealthy widow whose name was Khadija. She's about 15 years older than him. And she was really impressed by his character and his acumen, and so she did something very unusual, even in our day and age. She proposed marriage to him. And he accepted, and when they married, he was 25 and she was 40, and the age difference will matter, I'll tell you why. When Muhammad was 40, he said, and you can believe it or not, but I'm just telling you what happened, he said that he received a revelation from the angel Gabriel, and that he was the last in a line of prophets that had begun with Adam and gone through Jesus and was ending with him. And as is usually the case, people did not appreciate this. And so at first they kind of just made fun of him, and as he attracted more and more followers, especially people of lower social standing by the standards of the time, the larger community of Mecca began to feel threatened. And so they took a very radical step. In the year 616, they announced that Muhammad's entire clan, most of whom were not Muslim, most of whom did not believe in him, they just happened to be related to him, would be exiled from Mecca, and no tribe would be permitted to engage in any form of commerce with them. They would literally have to survive with whatever they possessed, in a society that, as I pointed out to you, was not an agricultural society, right? People depended for their livelihood on trade. And so they lived in exile in the wilds of the desert of Arabia for 3 years. And it was a very hard time. And I can imagine that for someone like Muhammad, it must have been bewildering, because he believed, and some of the people around him believed, that God was choosing him for a certain mission. And it must have felt very hard to process that if on the one hand God is asking you to do this, and on the other hand people are being punished because of the simple fact that they choose to believe in you, and you can't do anything to help them, must have really messed with your head. And in the 3rd year of the boycott, his uncle Abu Talib passed away. He was much older, and the physical toll of the isolation cost him his life. And a few weeks later, his wife Khadija died. And it's worth noting that when he first received revelation, he actually didn't believe it himself. It was Khadija who believed in it, so she has the interesting distinction of being the first Muslim. That she told him that he wasn't crazy, because he thought he was going crazy. And she said, based on what I know of you, I can't imagine that someone would come to you and do this to you, that you would never be possessed, that this only can be that something is coming from a righteous source. And so she died. And the year is called a year of sorrow, because he was shattered. And so one night, we believe, the angel Gabriel came to Muhammad and carried him to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem up to heaven, from the rock up to heaven. And there, he entered the divine presence, and it must have been a bittersweet moment, because in the Muslim tradition, every prophet has a title. Abraham is Khalilullah, the friend of God. Moses is Kalimullah, the one who spoke directly to God. Jesus is Ruhullah, the Spirit of God, because Jesus is the Word and the Spirit. And Muhammad is Habibullah, the beloved of God. And so in Muslim poetry and literature, it's sort of portrayed as this very intimate encounter, but it must have been bittersweet because Muhammad realized he'd have to go back. And he'd have to go back to a world where his uncle is dead, he had basically no family left, and his wife was dead, and his people had turned him out and were actually trying to kill him and his followers, of which there were probably only 100. And so God says to him, I give your people a gift. In one night and one day, you will have 50 prayers to perform. And Muhammad felt that this was, it was described as a way of meeting God, your own personal ascension to Jerusalem. So Muhammad is very happy, and as he travels back down through heaven, he bumps into Moses. And Moses says, hey, what's up? And Muhammad says, not much. I just got a gift from God, it's 50 daily prayers. And Moses starts laughing, like, are you serious? And he's like, yeah. He's like, nobody in your community is going to pray 50 times a day. You probably want to go back and ask for a reduction. Muhammad's like, are you sure? Moses is like, yeah, I'm pretty sure. So Muhammad goes back up to God. He's like, hey, I was talking to Moses. He seemed to think that 50 was a little bit much. So God says, okay, 40. And he goes back down. He's like, guess what? We're at 40. And Moses is like, look, man, like that's not going to happen either. This is in the Islamic tradition. I mean, the hey, what's up part isn't, but it's a contemporary American interpretation of Islamic scripture. So it's a good thing this is on YouTube so I can get death sentences. That'll totally drive book sales. Be awesome. So, I'm counting on you to protect me, Brad. So Muhammad goes back up and go back down, back up, back down, and finally he comes down to Moses and says, we got down to 5. And what Moses says is fascinating. He says, I tried to get the children of Israel to do less than that, and they couldn't. And my followers, and this is in the Muslim tradition, Moses says, my followers are stronger than your followers in their hearts, in their minds, in their sight, and their seeing. And if they couldn't do it, yours are definitely not going to do it. And Muhammad says, look, I kind of feel a little bit embarrassed with this whole back and forth thing. We're going to have to just end it at 5. And so Muhammad returns to the rock, and there we believe he meets all the prophets who ever lived, and they pray together as one. And the Dome of the Rock was constructed about 60 years after he died, on that very site. And the reason I mention this to you is because it's fascinating to me that the oldest instance of Muslim monumental architecture, the first really fancy building Muslims built, was a building dedicated to love. And we believe that God brought Muhammad to Jerusalem because he had lost the two people he loved the most in the world. And so he was heartbroken. And from Jerusalem, we believe, we received the 5 daily prayers, which is a sign of God's love for humanity, that he wants us to talk to him. And one of the reasons why it spoke to me so much is because love was an emotion. I mean, probably in your minds, if I say Islam, love is probably not the first word that comes to mind. For many people who aren't Muslim, and for many people who are Muslim, we don't associate that emotion with our religious tradition. And I didn't growing up. I never really thought this was possible. I grew up in a town where it was me, it was Jeff, he was Jewish, everyone else was Christian. They're very nice. They had no idea what I was. I didn't really know what I was either, though, that's fine. And Jeff's mom basically spent every day asking me to find Jeff a Jewish girl, which was amazing, because I don't know how I had access to Jewish women, given that I was a Muslim kid. But anyway, Jeff is now a Buddhist. So, totally messed up that one. That's my bad. I own up to that. That's, it's my fault. Jeff should have sat next to me on the plane. What I got from my friends who were Christian, and I had many friends who were of varying levels of religiosity, was this idea of love as part of your faith. And it took me a long time to make the connection, but the reason I felt such a bond to Jerusalem and to that building is because I had learned the value of that emotion and that connection and that bond, not through Muslims, but through Christians. And it was people of a different faith who inspired me to look at my faith from a different perspective and to learn it and teach it in a way different than I had learned it before and that I had been taught it before. And now I am in this interesting space where I teach courses on Islam for an educational institution headquartered in Israel. So I teach rabbis, and I bring Muslim leaders to Israel to study with Jewish scholars. And the reason I do that is because I think we have in life a very significant choice. It's the choice between the and or the or. That all of us are made up of different strands. The influences of our friends, our family, our personality, our life experiences, our preferences, the times we screwed up, the times we hurt people, the times we were hurt by people. And we can decide to rip ourselves into different pieces. Or we can decide to try to find a way to bring those parts of ourselves together. There are a fair number of people in this country who unfortunately have begun to believe that we are an either-or nation. You are either American or an immigrant. You are either Muslim or Western. And there are plenty of Muslims, as we all know, who also believe that. There's plenty of people everywhere in the world who believe that. But what I'm asking you to do today is to think about the ways in which you can bring the different parts of your life together and find that those different parts of your life actually speak to each other. That is not to say that we are all the same. We have differences, and differences are important. As Moses pointed out to Muhammad, there are differences. And differences are ultimately a healthy thing. But underlying it, I think, is the common experience of being human. And so when I went back to Jerusalem and I took our students to the Dome of the Rock, it occurred to me that I had a chance to share with them something of my faith in the hopes that perhaps it would change the way they look at the world. And if I'm being totally honest, hopefully, inspire them to look at their own faiths with renewed vigor and attention. And ultimately, what I wanted to communicate to them is that the reason that all of these stories last, that we tell these stories so much, is because they are about ordinary people who suffer, who struggle, who are hurt, who love, and who sacrifice for each other. The anniversary of Muhammad's journey to Jerusalem was this past Saturday, 1,399 years ago. And probably most of the great people of the time, the kings and the emperors and the wealthy people, were very quickly forgotten by history. But it was very simple people who appeared to exist on the margins, like a Moses or a Jesus or a Muhammad, who were celebrated centuries and centuries later. And that's the bond of love. And the challenge for all of us is that we have to be willing to sacrifice for the things we love, for ourselves, for those around us, and for the country we live in. Thank you very much. I've been told that I am allowed to take 2 questions. This is a remarkably generous offer. So you can ask a question and raise your hand and understand that your question has to be awesome because it is 50% of the allotted questions. I know what you're thinking, and the answer is no, I do not work out. Right? It's just the good people at H&M who make the shirts that make you look a little bit better. It's wrong, it's Swedish. Who doesn't like Sweden? So, do I just call on people?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So if you have a question, you may raise a hand. And if you don't have a question, oh, we have a question. Yes, sir.
Senator Kafalis.
Thank you. As one who was also in New York on September 11, 2001, experienced a wide range of emotions as a Christian, and listening to some of the implications. I was in Brooklyn at the time. What were the range of emotions that you were feeling on that day?
So I'll give you a few vignettes of that day to try to make sense of it. So the question was, the senator was actually in New York City as well on September 11th, 2001. And he asked me, please let me know if I'm misinterpreting this, what were the emotions that I felt that day, particularly as a Muslim, being in New York City. So I can give you a few kind of moments that spoke to me in different ways. The first is that my brother worked in one of the towers. And so when the attacks happened, when I got out of the subway that day, the first tower had already been hit. And I asked someone what happened, and they said a plane had flown into one of the towers, and I think like pretty much everyone, I assumed it was a small plane, like a passenger, like a private plane, and it was a horrible accident, but nothing but an accident, and I went to class. And then that's when we found out the second tower had been hit, and it took me probably literally 5 seconds to realize that this was an attack, and a few more seconds to basically, I think very quickly I realized it was Al-Qaeda, because in my mind, there was no one else, there was no other group that could do it and would want to do it. And so, and then the third thought that occurred to me was, I'm president of the Muslim club, right? So probably a very awkward position to be in. And then I remember, when we got out and you could see the towers from NYU campus and then they were gone, it was just smoke. We didn't have cell phone service because one of the towers was the cell phone tower and the networks were overloaded, as you can imagine. And so we had heard that, Pittsburgh and Seattle and Chicago had been hit by planes. Everything was word of mouth and rumor, and nobody really knew what was happening. And a bunch of us got together in the park, Washington Square Park, and I don't quite know what we were thinking, but we decided to walk towards the towers to see if we could help. And we got as far as Canal Street, and there was just a wall of, I guess, like dust and smoke, and and someone came out of it caked in in dust and ash and all of that, and just kind of looked at us and said, "What are you doing?" And I didn't know. And so, in not knowing what to do, and there were no trains running, we decided that we would go to the Muslim prayer space, which was actually in the Catholic Church, and we would look for other Muslim students, and at least check in and make sure people who commuted or lived far away would have somewhere to stay. And I'll never forget this. I got to the prayer space maybe about an hour after the towers had collapsed, and there was one person inside the prayer space, an Orthodox Jewish student named Israel. Can't make this up. From Argentina. And he and I had often been on the other side of a lot of political conversations. You can imagine, how college students are, like me, but with more hair. And I kind of looked at him and I said, "Israel, what are you doing here?" With the, subtext, this is probably not where you want to be right now. And I'll never forget this, because this is, mind you, this is like 11 in the morning. He said, "Well, it occurred to me that some of your students might be afraid of walking home today. And I thought that if someone saw them walking with a Jewish student, they'd leave them alone." And that still blows me away. That someone can have the presence of mind, and a lot of people did. I think a lot of people sacrificed, as we know, and risked and gave their lives. But a lot of people who saw what happened and saw that sacrifice also, I think, realized to themselves that they would have to give something or do something. And so for me, and I think for a lot of people who came of age then, the question was not, do I do something? It's, what do I do? So hopefully that answers. Thank you for the question. I have time for one more question, I believe. So now it's a tough question to follow. It's a good question. That was good. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Haroon, for bringing some new knowledge to our experience here this evening. And we want to close this evening with actually some overview comments from 3 community leaders. So as I call your name, would you come up and you can give some impressions that you've had from Haroon's talk to us tonight. The Imam Ali from Northeast Islamic Center, would you please come up? And I think waiting, as we say, on deck, if you would come up, Dr. Bill Watson from the Colorado Christian University. And Melanie Perlman, would you please come up, from the Executive Director from the Cell. Iman?
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, that is, with Almighty God's name, the merciful benefactor, the merciful redeemer. While listening to our brother speaker, it reminded me of a prayer that we as Muslims do. We're obligated to do it each and every prayer. And even the Eid celebration, we do the what we call Salatu Ibrahimiyya. And in that prayer, sometimes we as Muslims, we miss the point of the prayer. When Prophet Muhammad, the prayers and the peace be upon him, his followers came to him after they had heard the what is called the Lord's Prayer. And they came to Prophet Muhammad and they told him about the prayer, and they asked him, what should we say? And he said to say this prayer. He said, Allahumma salli wa Sayyid Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Mubarak wa Sayyid Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim fil alamin innaka Hamidum Majid. And that means, O God, make Muhammad successful and the followers of Muhammad successful, as you did make Abraham successful and the followers of Abraham successful. Surely you are praised and magnified. And bless Muhammad and the followers of Muhammad, as you did bless Abraham and the followers of Abraham. Surely you are praised and magnified in our midst. So when we reflect on it, who are the followers of Abraham? Who have been successful and blessed? It's the Christians and the Jews. Peace. Thank you.
Bill Watson.
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege, Mosaic, of being able to speak, Ishmael. Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize-winning economist, as a boy in Calcutta during the times of troubles between Muslims and Hindus, he was in Calcutta, and in the courtyard of his home, a Muslim man ran in, chased by Hindu militants, and he observed the Muslim man beaten to death. He tells that in the first chapter of a book on identity. And he said that if we focus on the identities we have that differ from others, it results in conflicts. But if we focus on the identities that we have similar, and so our speaker, I appreciate what he said today and tonight, and I'd like to focus on our similarities. My mother is the daughter of immigrants, Eastern European Jews, so I have that in common with you. Also, I have a national security background, but I'm a little older. I worked at an NSA field station or listening post in Berlin during the Cold War. We had all the East Germans bugged. But so we do have another similarity to that. Another is that I do teach Islam to non-Muslims, because at Colorado Christian University, an evangelical school, all the professors have to be evangelicals, and so I teach the courses on Islam. In closing, I would like to say that the Apostle John in 1 John 4 said, let us love one another, for love is of God. He that loves is born of God and knows God. He that loves not knows not God, for God is love. I often tell Christians, especially my students at the school, that if you hate, you can't be a Christian. I'll go further. If you hate, you don't know God. You may claim to know God. But if you really know God, you will love. Period. You will love the immigrants. You will love Jews. You will love Muslims. Not just Christians. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Watson. Melanie?
Thank you. First of all, what an incredible presentation. Thank you, Haroon. That was just remarkable. I am certainly honored to be here and be part of your dinner this evening. I wrote a few comments down that I'd actually like to convey to all of you. I'm proud to say that the mission of the Meisel Institute and those of our two centers, the Meisel Museum and the Cell, are closely aligned with the incredible work of both the Mosaic as well as the Abrahamic Initiative. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, former chief rabbi of the UK, writes in his book, The Dignity of Difference, without a moral vision, we will fail. And that vision, to be shared, can only emerge from conversation, from talking to one another and listening to one another across boundaries of class, income, race, and faith. We live in a world that is incredibly divided. Racism, unfortunately, is on the rise. So is violence, and so are terror attacks. At times, it can feel hopeless. Yet, as Rabbi Sachs writes, the greatest single antidote to violence is conversation. Speaking our fears, listening to the fears of others, and in that, sharing the vulnerabilities, discovering a genesis of hope. And with the work of the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation and the Abrahamic Initiative and the extraordinary people like Haroon and leaders like Dr. Watson, Imam Ali, and Rabbi Sachs, there is hope. When the Meisel Museum brings Holocaust survivors to schools to teach children firsthand the dangers of racism and hatred, there is hope. The U.S. Constitution begins with we the people. Our country was founded on the idea that we share a collective responsibility for our collective future. We cannot let that be forgotten. What none of us can achieve alone, all of us can achieve together. Thank you, and good night.
Thank you, Melanie Perlman. And distinguished guests this evening, ladies, gentlemen, elected and appointed officials, all the religious leaders of the interfaith group that we've brought together, and the community leaders as well. We thank you tonight for coming, and the Multicultural Mosaic Foundation and the Abrahamic Initiative dialogue this year has come to an end. And Haroon Moghul will be in the outside by the registration table for book purchases and signings if you feel like visiting with him. And please feel free to talk among yourselves as we don't have an ending time to be out of the cathedral, but you can give time to talk to our distinguished author tonight. And as we remember to work hand in hand for a better tomorrow. Thank you.